Welcome to International Trade, Econ 3000 at Northwood University. This is a course about how, with the use of imports and exports, we can improve the material well-being of society. Contrary to what you hear about outsourcing and loss of jobs, if done right, if based upon what we call comparative advantage, international trading increases the welfare of society. Back in the 1930s, because of the Great Depression, international trade virtually came to a halt, and undoubtedly was one of the major factors causing such a desperate condition in this country until the Second World War, and some would say even a few years after. So the purpose of international trade course is to explain to you why this is good for society. It's one of the reasons. We'll look at the micro and macro aspects of it. And towards the end of the course, as this book includes several chapters in international finance, we'll delve into that. As I was saying, in the 1930s, countries engaged in what we call bigger thy neighbor policies. In macroeconomic theory, we find that exports stimulate an economy because they add to aggregate demand, and imports depress an economy because they depress aggregate demand. When aggregate demand increases, it tends to increase economic activity, employment, etc., real income. When economic activity shrinks to lower levels, then the opposite occurs. So in macroeconomics, we understand why countries that were having trouble, as many were, getting out of the depression of the 1930s, resorted to bigger than neighbor policies. They would promote exports and try to reduce imports. In other words, provide a net stimulus, much as today we would use tax cuts or spending increases by government to stimulate or depress an economy. During the Great Depression, one of the chief tools, so-called bigger than neighbor, was to stimulate exports and reduce imports. Unfortunately, however, one nation's exports are the nation's imports, and one nation's imports are the nation's exports. So when you stimulate your economy by promoting exports, you're depressing the other nation's economies by promoting their imports, and vice versa for imports. This will all come out in the wash as we progress along this semester. Now, in a microeconomic sense, international trade is very helpful because what it does is it enables us to specialize, and if we specialize along our lines of what we call comparative advantage as opposed to absolute advantage, both of which concepts will be delved into in great detail later. If we specialize along these lines of our opportunity costs, so that we export goods in which we have an opportunity or so-called comparative advantage, and imports goods which we have a comparative disadvantage. In effect, it moves this production possibility curve out. During the coming week or two, we will delve into these notions of comparative advantage, opportunity cost, and production possibility curve. But the production possibility curve, simply put, we'll look at it later in more depth. It tells us the maximum amount of goods we can produce, goods or services we can produce of each item we so desire to produce. Theoretically, it could have an infinite number of dimensions, but since we deal with textbooks and flat space, we generally have two goods or services, such as war goods, peace goods during wartime, or consumer goods, and then other goods such as public goods, government spending, exports, and the investment goods, capital goods, production of capital goods. So what international trade enables us to do is to push this production possibility curve over. In other words, from the same resources, same technologies, we can produce more of any good we want that we could not do without international trade. The basis of international trade, comparative advantage, is no different than interpersonal or intranational trade. There is no difference. Trade is all trade is based upon the same principle, comparative advantage. That's what we're going to delve into. So in a sense, you're not just learning about international trade, you're learning about trade in general, because the same principle applies to all forms of trade, be it between people, within a nation between people, or between nations. It doesn't make any difference. So that's what the trade part is we're going to delve into. Why it's good for society. Now, I like to stress in my lectures, my courses, what you rarely hear of in other courses. Each professor has his own distinctive ways of teaching, but free market capitalism thrives on competition. You say, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. In fact, it dies without competition. Now, not all markets can be competitive. There are what we call natural monopolies like public utilities, electric companies, although even that is beginning to change. There are natural oligopolies where we can't afford more than 8 or 9 or 6 firms because of the limited size of the market. If the market were bigger, it could become more competitive. But for a large number of markets, large number of industries, many firms are possible. The international trade promotes competition by expanding the universe of firms that can compete. Ergo, it benefits society. Now, these economic welfare is very distinct from social welfare. Economic welfare addresses the questions of the per capita standard of living, a fair income distribution, high employment, reasonably price level stability. That's economic welfare. Economic welfare for a society is best under capitalism by far. It beats socialism or communism as derivative, fashion, whatever you want. There's nothing to beat capitalism, but it must be competitive. And what happens is in many markets, such as in the OPEC and the oil industry, and when the American companies were allowed to merge, remember that 13 became 3, 4 or 5 large firms. Competition waned and the oil prices shot up from $25, $30 a barrel to $100, $150 a barrel and stayed there for a couple of years. And they'd still be there if it weren't for fracking, which is another form of competition, getting oil from fracturing the ground and so forth. Anyways, international trade promotes competition. And in promoting competition, increases society's welfare. It's good. It's good. Now, you can hear some components of society, oh, they're taking jobs away from the U.S. No, what they're doing is they're slowly transforming our society to move towards its comparative advantage and away from its comparative disadvantage. And that helps everybody. The problem when you do not have competition, when you don't have international trade as a base of competition, is that a few benefit. Those that are producing goods where they do not have a comparative advantage, but the many hurt. Remember, the few benefit at the cost of the many. That's why it's against the welfare of society. We're going to dig into that as we go along. Okay, there's a big picture out there you've got to see. You've got to have that roadmap ahead of you and look at where we're at. Lest when you think you're going to California, you end up in Maine. So we have to have that map, and we'll continue to refer to it and so forth as the course develops. Now, technically, this course lasts 8 weeks, and there will be quizzes and discussion boards and review questions and lectures. I'll supply my own lectures, along with the textbook material that you'll get from the textbook. And so there'll be a lot of material you're going to have to read. This is not an easy way to learn. It's in many ways a better way to learn than face-to-face. But it's not easy. Don't get the idea it's easy. And like a face-to-face kind of course, the less you do, the less you'll learn. The more you do, the more you'll learn. And I'd like to conclude with one comment. If you think you know everything, you're completely uneducated. Because it's the mark of an educated person, and hear this well, that the more you know you don't know. And when you understand that, you will be on the road to true education. I hope this is a good semester for you. I'm an old veteran at this. I have a good reputation. You can look up my scores, my evaluation scores from students over the years, and it's among the best. So sit back, enjoy, work hard, and we'll learn a lot. See you next week. Okay, how'd it go?